My name is Alex, and I'm 32 years old. For the past 6 months, I've been engaged to Emma, the love of my life. We've been together for 4 years, and I truly believed that we were finally entering the happiest chapter of our lives, planning a wedding that was set to take place next month. But recent events have shattered that illusion, and everything feels as though it's spiraling out of control. To understand how it got to this point, you need some background. I have a younger sister, Sophia, who's 29. I haven't spoken to her in over 8 years, and there are very good reasons for that. Growing up, Sophia and I just couldn't seem to get along. Our parents tried their best to force us into some ideal sibling relationship, but all we ever did was clash. She was relentlessly competitive, always trying to outdo me in every possible way. I still remember the moment that set the tone for everything. I was 10 and Sophia was 7. I had just won a spelling bee at school, and our parents decided to take us out for ice cream to celebrate. Instead of being happy for me, Sophia had a full-blown meltdown right there in the ice cream shop. She screamed that it wasn't fair, and that she could spell better than I could. She demanded that our parents quiz her then and there, making the entire situation awkward and humiliating. That was just the beginning. As we got older, her behavior became more insidious. If I got an A on a test, she'd obsessively study until she could match my grade. If I made the soccer team, suddenly, she was interested in soccer. When I started dating in high school, Sophia would go out of her way to flirt with any girl I liked. It was exhausting. My home, which should have been a place of peace, became a battlefield. Our parents tried everything they could think of to fix the dynamic. They even sent us to family therapy when I was 16 and Sophia was 13. But Sophia refused to participate. She would sit there in stony silence while the therapist tried, in vain, to get her to engage. After a while, the therapist told my parents that unless Sophia was willing to open up, there was nothing more she could do. Things came to a breaking point when we were both in our early 20s. I had just graduated from college and landed my dream job at a top-tier tech company. It was the kind of opportunity that people dream of: great pay, fantastic benefits, and the chance to work on groundbreaking projects. I was over the moon. Meanwhile, Sophia was still floundering in college, switching majors multiple times, and barely keeping it together academically. When I shared the news about my job offer over dinner, Sophia snapped. Her face contorted with rage, and she screamed accusations at me, saying I was always overshadowing her and ruining her life. She hurled venomous words at me, things like, "Why can't you just fail for once? And why don't you just disappear so I can finally have a chance to shine?" The anger and jealousy in her eyes were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Our parents tried to calm her down, but she stormed out, slamming the door so hard that a picture fell off the wall. That night, I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends. She was talking about how she'd make me pay, how she would finally knock me down a peg. I dismissed it as just another one of her dramatic empty threats. But I was so wrong. A few days later, as I was preparing to start my new job, I received a call from HR. They told me they were rescinding my offer. Someone had sent them a series of vile emails supposedly from me, filled with racist and sexist content. They also had social media posts, meticulously forged to make me look like a hateful, awful person. My dream job vanished in an instant. I was devastated and furious. Deep down, I knew who had done it. Sophia was the only one who had the motive and the detailed knowledge to pull something like that off. When I confronted her, she denied it at first, but then she broke down and admitted everything. She had made the fake accounts, forged the emails, and destroyed my reputation, just because she wanted to see me fail. There was a twisted pride in her voice, as if she had finally won some warped competition. I was crushed. This wasn't sibling rivalry anymore. This was a deliberate act of sabotage from my own flesh and blood. I told her I never wanted to see or speak to her again, and walked out of the house that day. I crashed on a friend's couch while I tried to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life. In the years that followed, I cut all contact with Sophia. My parents still saw her occasionally, but they knew better than to bring her up around me. Rebuilding my career was an uphill battle. I had to start with a lower-paying job and claw my way back up. But eventually I did make it. Now I have a great job, supportive friends, and until recently, I had Emma. When I met Emma 4 years ago, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. She was kind, funny, and understanding. On our third date, I told her everything about Sophia. She listened and sympathized, saying that family relationships could be complicated, and that she respected my decision to cut ties. I made one thing crystal clear. Sophia was not to be a part of my life, especially not at my wedding. At first, Emma seemed to understand, but as we got deeper into planning the wedding, things started to shift. She kept bringing up Sophia, suggesting that maybe it was time to forgive and forget. Every time I shut her down, the thought of seeing Sophia again made my stomach churn. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and having Sophia there would turn it into a nightmare. Emma would drop the subject for a while, but I could tell she wasn't happy. It all came to a head last week, when we were finalizing the guest list. Emma pushed the issue again, and this time she wouldn't back down. I remember the exact moment when everything fell apart. We were sitting in the living room, the guest list spread out on the coffee table between us. I was already tired and stressed from work, and the last thing I wanted was to rehash the same argument we'd had before. But Emma was determined. "Alex, I really think you should reconsider inviting Sophia," she said, her voice soft, like she was trying to ease me into it. "She's your sister. Don't you think it's time to forgive and move on?" I clenched my jaw. This wasn't the first time she'd said those words, but for some reason, they hit me harder this time. "Emma, we've talked about this. It's not happening. Having her there will ruin everything. You know what she did to me." Emma sighed, her frustration barely hidden. "But it was years ago. People change. Maybe she regrets it." I felt the familiar anger bubbling up. Regrets it? She destroyed my career, my reputation. She knew exactly what she was doing. How do you just regret something like that? Her eyes searched mine, looking for some flicker of compromise. "I'm not saying what she did was okay. I just think maybe she deserves a chance to make it right." I stared at her in disbelief. "Why are you pushing this? Why does she deserve a chance to be at our wedding?" Emma's face hardened. "Because family is important, Alex. I can't imagine cutting someone off forever." The words stung more than they should have. "Family? You think this is about some petty grudge? She didn't just steal my toys or read my diary. She sabotaged my entire life. I had to rebuild everything from scratch, because of her." She shook her head, her voice growing sharper. "You're being stubborn. You're punishing her for a mistake she made when she was young. That did it." I snapped. "A mistake? Do you know how humiliating it was to lose that job? To have my name dragged through the mud, because my sister couldn't stand that I was doing well? That's not a mistake, Emma. That's cruelty." She crossed her arms and looked away. "Maybe she's grown. Maybe she wants to apologize. And maybe I don't care," I shot back. "She made her choices and I made mine. I told you this was a boundary for me. If you can't respect that, then maybe we shouldn't be getting married." Emma's eyes widened in shock. I could see the hurt spread across her face, like a shadow. "You're seriously saying that over this?" "Yes," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "Because it's not just about this. It's about trust. You're supposed to be on my side, Emma. You knew how much this meant to me. And you're still trying to push me." We sat there in silence. The weight of my words hung in the air. My heart pounded. Every beat a painful reminder of how far we'd fallen from the happy couple we were just months ago. Finally, Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought you'd understand. I thought love meant forgiveness." I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "Love also means respect. And I can't respect someone who won't respect my boundaries." Emma said nothing in response, her eyes glossed with unshed tears. The weight of her silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, she stood, her movements slow and deliberate, and walked out of the room. I sat there, alone, staring at the guest list, the names blurring as my vision grew misty. The following day, a coldness had settled between us. Emma hardly spoke to me, and when she did, her words were curt, distant, as though she was speaking through a wall. The woman I had once known felt like a stranger. I told myself this was just a rough patch, that the love we shared would pull us through. But deep down, I knew something had irrevocably shifted. Trust had been cracked, and once that happens, it's nearly impossible to piece it back together. A week later, everything exploded. I had just come home from a grueling day at work, feeling drained, when I saw Emma sitting at the dining table. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, and something about her posture screamed that something was terribly wrong. My stomach tightened with an unsettling premonition. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice laced with caution. She took a shaky breath, guilt written all over her face. And then the words came tumbling out in a whisper. "Alex, I need to tell you something." My stomach twisted in dread. "What?" I reached out to Sophia. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "You what?" I asked, my voice rising, controlled fury bubbling under the surface. "I found her on social media a few months ago," she explained, tears welling up in her eyes. "I've been talking to her. I just wanted to understand what happened between you two. I invited her to the wedding." It felt like the ground beneath me vanished. I couldn't breathe, the room spun. "You invited her?" My voice barely held together. "You went behind my back. You betrayed me." She collapsed into sobs, her face crumpling with regret. "Alex, please, I love you. I was just trying to help." "Help?" I laughed bitterly, disbelief in every syllable. "You think this is helping? You knew how I felt, and you did it anyway. This isn't love, Emma. This is manipulation." She reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to touch me, but I pulled away, my heart breaking all over again. "If you can't respect me enough to trust my judgment, then we have nothing left." "Don't say that," she cried, voice cracking. "We can fix this." I shook my head, the weight of the betrayal sinking deeper with each passing second. "No, Emma. You broke my trust. And without trust, there's nothing left to fix." I turned and walked away, each step feeling heavier than the last. The space between us felt final, like a door slamming shut on the life we'd once had. I knew it was over, but that realization hurt more than anything I could have imagined. The silence in the apartment was suffocating. Emma retreated to the guest room, and I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the storm inside my head. Sleep never came. Instead, I was trapped in an endless loop of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. The next morning, the weight of it all settled in. I could hear Emma moving around, the muffled sound of her packing filling the air. I didn't need to ask. I knew the life we'd built together was unraveling, and neither of us could stop it. When she finally emerged from the guest room, suitcase in hand, our eyes met. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was a quiet resolve in her expression. "Are you sure this is what you want, Alex?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. "No, Emma. This isn't what I want. But it's what you've left me with." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, nodding silently. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, voice cracking. "I know," I replied softly. "But that doesn't change what you did." We stood there for a moment, the air thick with everything left unsaid. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind her was a finality I wasn't ready for. I sank onto the couch, the emptiness of the apartment pressing down on me. It felt as though the walls themselves were closing in, the silence deafening in its finality. The next few days passed in a blur. I officially called off the wedding, canceling the venue, the caterers, the florist. Each call felt like another stab to my heart, like I was dismantling a dream piece by piece. My friends tried to be supportive, though some of them clearly didn't understand. Emma's family, on the other hand, made no effort to mask their anger. Her mother called me a heartless monster, accusing me of throwing away a perfect relationship over petty sibling drama. Her brother, who I used to be close with, sent me a long, bitter text, telling me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I stared at the screen, feeling numb. They didn't know the full story. They didn't understand how deep the hurt went. Meanwhile, my own parents had their say. They called me relentlessly, leaving voicemails that ranged from pleading to guilt-tripping. My mother's voice was shaky, tearful. "Alex, please, this could be a chance to heal the family. Don't let this tear everything apart." But it wasn't me who had torn everything apart. It was Sophia. And now it was Emma too. The people who were supposed to stand by me, to protect me, had crossed lines I couldn't forgive. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to an email from Sophia. I almost deleted it without reading, but something in me couldn't resist. The subject line simply read, "I'm sorry." The email was long, filled with apologies and explanations. She wrote about how she'd spent years in therapy, trying to understand her jealousy and resentment. She admitted that what she did to me was unforgivable, but claimed she was a different person now. She wanted to reconnect, to make amends, to be a sister to me again. I stared at the words on the screen, feeling nothing but exhaustion. Was I supposed to believe that a few years of therapy could erase the pain she had caused me? Could I undo the damage of losing my dream job, the humiliation, the years of struggle to rebuild my career? The scars ran too deep. I closed the email without responding. The weekend that followed was solitary. My mind kept circling back to Emma. I missed her, missed the way she'd laugh at my dumb jokes, the way her eyes would light up when she talked about her passions. But the trust we once had felt irreparably shattered. It wasn't just about Sophia. It was about Emma choosing to disregard something I had made crystal clear from the very beginning. I tried to distract myself with the gym, lifting weights until my arms burned, hoping the physical pain would somehow dull the emotional one. Afterward, I sat in my car, drenched in sweat, staring at the windshield, lost in thought. Was I being too stubborn? Was it worth losing Emma over this? But every time I considered reaching out, I remembered the deep, raw hurt when she admitted she'd gone behind my back. The betrayal, the cold realization that the person I loved hadn't respected my boundaries. No matter how much I loved her, that wound was too fresh, too deep. The next morning at work, my boss Denise, a no-nonsense woman who had always been supportive, pulled me aside. "You doing okay?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I forced a smile, though it felt hollow. "I'm getting there." She studied me for a moment before nodding. "Sometimes standing your ground is the hardest thing to do, but it's worth it." Her words stayed with me throughout the day. I spent the rest of the day lost in code, letting the rhythm of work keep the chaos in my mind at bay. By the time I got home, the apartment felt emptier than ever. But for the first time in days, I felt a small sense of peace. I had made the right choice. It didn't make the pain any less real, but at least I hadn't compromised myself. That night, I deleted Sophia's email. I didn't need to read it again. I knew my answer. In the days that followed, life continued, but I felt like I was standing still. The apartment, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and hollow. Emma's absence was a constant ache. Her side of the closet was empty, the bathroom shelves half bare. I kept catching myself expecting to hear her voice in the quiet moments, only to be reminded that she was gone. I threw myself into work, using the long hours and challenging projects as a distraction, but it didn't fill the void. Nothing would. No matter how much I tried to keep myself busy, the weight of everything still lingered. Betrayal, shattered trust, a future that had slipped through my fingers. It followed me like a dark shadow, looming over every moment. Then came the call from my parents, an unexpected buzz late one evening. For a fleeting moment, I considered ignoring it, but something inside urged me to pick up. "Hi, Mom," I answered, my voice flat-tired. "Alex," she said cautiously, "please come to dinner this weekend. We need to talk." I hesitated, exhaustion creeping into my words. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "It's important." Against my better judgment, I agreed, knowing that some part of me still hoped they might finally understand, finally see things from my side. But deep down, I knew I was setting myself up for disappointment. When Saturday evening arrived, I found myself driving to my parents' house, my stomach a knot of nerves. The memories of my childhood home felt tainted now, each step toward the front door heavy with the sadness that had replaced the comfort it once offered. I braced myself before the door opened, and my mom greeted me with a tight, forced smile. "I'm so glad you came," she said softly, pulling me into a hug that felt less like comfort and more like a silent plea. I stepped inside, and immediately the atmosphere felt off, thick with tension, like a storm waiting to break. Then I saw her, Sophia, sitting at the dining table. Her eyes met mine, wide with what almost looked like regret. A cold rush of anger washed over me. "What is she doing here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with the fury I couldn't suppress. "Alex, please," my dad said, his expression full of pain. We just want to help you two make peace. Make peace? I repeated bitterly. You did this behind my back. You ambushed me. My mom's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. We thought if you two just talked, you could finally heal. I shook my head. My hands clenched into fists. You don't get it. You never have. Alex, wait. Sophia spoke up, her voice quivering. I just want to apologize. Her words fell flat like empty noise. I turned to my parents, my throat tight with bitterness. You're still trying to fix something that's beyond repair. You can't force this. We just want our family back, my dad said, his voice cracking with emotion. This is your family now, I said, my voice hard. One where trust doesn't matter, where betrayal gets swept under the rug. I turned toward the door, the weight of finality pressing down on me. I told you where I stood. If you can't respect that, then I don't know what else to say. I walked out, my heart pounding in my ears. My mom's sobs trailing behind me, but I didn't look back. The cold night air hit my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a clear sense of resolve. The lines had been drawn. I hadn't crossed theirs, and I wouldn't let them cross mine. That night, I sat in my car for a long while before driving home. My phone buzzed with texts from my parents, Sophia, even Emma. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to explain myself again, to justify my pain. I had done that too many times already. When I finally returned to the apartment, the emptiness no longer felt suffocating. It was like space I could breathe in. I was tired of holding on to relationships that hurt me, of trying to piece together something that no longer fit. I spent the next few days reflecting in silence, coming to terms with the fact that I had burned bridges that couldn't be rebuilt. But there was an odd sense of freedom in it. I was no longer burdened by the weight of others' expectations. I wasn't obligated to forgive someone who hadn't earned it. One evening, I decided to meet up with some friends. They had been worried about me, and I knew it was time to step back into the world. We went to a small bar downtown, the kind where the music was low, and the conversations flowed easily. As I sipped my drink, listening to their laughter, I realized just how much I had isolated myself. The world hadn't ended because my engagement had. Life kept moving, and so could I. Later, as we were leaving, my friend Jake clapped me on the shoulder. You did the right thing, man, he said. It takes guts to stand up for yourself. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. For the first time in a long while, I believed it. Standing my ground had cost me, but losing myself would have cost so much more. The next morning, I went for a walk in the park. The sun filtered through the trees, casting golden rays along the path ahead. I breathed in the crisp morning air, letting it fill my lungs. There was still pain, still loss, but there was also hope. I was finally free to build a life where my boundaries were respected, where I didn't have to compromise my peace for the sake of someone else's version of family. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I was okay with that. One step at a time, I would figure it out. The days stretched into weeks, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. I wasn't the same person I had been before the breakup, but I was starting to feel more grounded. There was a strange peace in the quiet, in the simplicity of focusing on myself. It felt like I was slowly rebuilding the foundations of my life, not for anyone else, but just for me. I spent more time with friends, people who accepted me for who I was. We hiked through the hills on crisp autumn mornings, shared late-night conversations over cheap pizza, and exchanged stories that reminded me what real connection felt like. These friendships were honest, untarnished by expectations or betrayal. They gave me the strength to keep moving forward. At work, things were steady. I threw myself into projects, taking on challenges that pushed me to grow. My boss, Denise, noticed the change in me. One day, she pulled me aside after a meeting. "You've been doing great, Alex," she said with a smile. "I can see the focus in you. Keep it up." I nodded, feeling a spark of pride. Her words reminded me that, despite everything, I was still capable, still driven. My past hadn't broken me. It had forged me into something stronger. One weekend, I decided it was time to clear out the apartment. I needed to let go of the remnants of what used to be. As I sifted through drawers and closets, I found small tokens from my relationship with Emma. A stray earring, an old movie ticket stub, a half-written grocery list in her handwriting. Each item carried a memory, a flicker of what we had. But instead of drowning in nostalgia, I chose to let them go. I placed them in a box, sealed it, and set it aside. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing to move forward. Forward without the weight of what could have been. Afterward, the apartment felt different, cleaner, lighter. It was finally my space. I rearranged the furniture, added a few plants, and hung up new artwork. These small changes made a big difference. The space now reflected who I was, not who I used to be. One evening, as I cooked dinner, something I was slowly getting better at, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "We miss you. Please talk to us when you're ready." I stared at the message for a long time. The hurt from the dinner ambush still lingered. But I also knew my parents weren't bad people. They just didn't understand the depth of my pain, the importance of the boundaries I needed to protect myself. I didn't reply right away. I needed more time, and that was okay. Healing didn't have to be rushed. A few weeks later, I found myself at a friend's barbecue when I met someone new. Her name was Rachel. She had an easy smile and a way of making conversation feel effortless. We talked about everything: movies, travel, the best taco spots in the city. She didn't ask about my past, didn't pry into the details. She simply enjoyed the moment with me, and that was refreshing. I didn't need to explain myself or justify my boundaries. I could just be. As the sun set, casting shades of orange and purple across the sky, Rachel turned to me and smiled. "Want to go get ice cream?" she asked. I laughed. "Sure, but no spelling bees afterward." She grinned, and in that moment, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the rush of falling in love, but the quiet comfort of knowing that maybe, just maybe, new beginnings were possible. That night, as I walked back into my apartment, I realized something. I wasn't over everything that had happened. The scars from Sophia's betrayal and Emma's broken trust were still there. But those scars didn't define me. They were simply part of my story. I was stronger now, more aware of what I needed and deserved. I knew that I couldn't control other people's actions, but I could control how I responded to them. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with my choices. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. The world was still moving,